This tutorial is part of our full-stack React Django DRF channels project, DJ Chat. You can watch this tutorial and many more from our YouTube course playlist, or the whole course, including access to additional resources from our Udemy course. The Udemy course link, which provides the best price for the course, is in the video description. So now we have these new features. We've integrated the font and we now have responsive fonts. We'll go ahead now and finish off the primary app bar. So to make it responsive for different screen sizes, as well as just add some different functionality, because when the app bar does scale it into the smaller screen sizes, we want to add potentially functionality to it so that users can still navigate successfully around our application. User experience is obviously very important in our application, so we need to make sure, like I alluded to, that when our app does scale down, that all these services and features are still available, or at least they can be still easily accessed through the interface here. So what we're going to do, like I said, is just finish off the primary app bar now, and that does include adding some different functions that we aren't necessarily going to utilize straight away, but as we start to build other components, they will come into play. I've also tried to take into account that this probably isn't going to be your only project you're going to undertake. So I've tried to add in some common features that you probably want to include on other applications that you build. Right, so let's go ahead. What we're going to build now is a new section here. That's going to be in the toolbar. What am I doing? Let's build that in the toolbar. So this is going to be an icon that's going to appear on the right-hand side whenever we move into the smaller sizes. And that's going to be a menu drop-down. So we're going to need to build an icon that will appear at the smaller size. And then we're going to need to build a drawer, which is going to be an element which will act as a menu whenever we select or click on the icon. So essentially we're just building a button which is going to open up a drawer and show you a menu at a smaller screen size. Actually, it's probably just easier to show you the preview. Now what's happening here is that these two menus here, they would disappear in smaller sizes. So we're going to need to ask ourselves, well, do they need to be accessible still so that users can access features, services from this application? The answer to that is yes and no. So this is just really kind of advertising popular channels if you aren't already a member of a channel. Of course, if you are logged in, this will probably show you your channels that you are a member of. So that doesn't necessarily need to be shown at smaller screen size, but this does. This is a menu system. This will allow us to navigate through and explore the different servers. So this needs to be available regardless of the screen size. That's important. And of course, the main section here will probably need to be shown as well, because otherwise no one will be able to select different servers. So you can see as we move down, you can see that when we get to a certain size, and we might want to change that. That's a little bit too small, right? So that's something we could probably, or you could probably change. So as we move down, once you get to this smaller screen size here, in actual fact, what's happening, the recommended channels are being moved across right here in the center. You can see that the text here, this popular channel text, has kind of popped over to the left-hand side. And you can see at the top here in our menu that the drop-down here hasn't moved, it just slides across. But what we have now is a situation where we cannot select the different categories. So this category menu now moves into the drop-down. You, of course, can go crazy and add some different options here. Maybe that isn't your preferred choice in terms of moving that menu. Maybe you want to add the categories right here so users can select it straight away, or maybe add a drop down actually on the page. Of course, these design decisions completely up to you, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to build a menu such as this should you develop some different applications. I think it's a fairly popular type of feature. Right, so you can see what's happening here, right? So one thing to also notice is by default, if I were to open, let's imagine we were in a browser on our laptop and we scale it down and we get to around about this size because we're working on multiple screens. If I were to open this menu, by default, if I were to scale this up, by default, this menu would not disappear. It would just stay there, which is a little bit strange. So what we also do is just make sure that when we scale up, that this menu will be removed. There we go. So first of all, let's control, this is where the icon is going to appear in this box. So let's just create the icon first. So this is going to be icon button. So we're going to need some sort of button so we can click on the icon, right? So, and then we go ahead and select the, I think it's the menu icon that we're going to be utilizing. So we need to just make sure that we add all those imports. So that doesn't have a quick fix available. So we just need to add that in, this icon. Now, this is making the assumption that you added the icons in at the start. So ideally you followed the steps that we took when we imported, so when we installed everything at the start. So we should be able to import the menu icon from at material UI, and then it's going to be /menu. That's at least one way of adding that menu icon in. So let's take a look. Actually, let's not take a look. We've done this wrong. Should be icons on reflection. Material, that should do. So let's take a look. There we go. So we now have our icon. You can see by default it has this circular grade section to indicate that we're hovering over the icon there. And you can see that I can click on it, but nothing happens at this point. So first of all, let's make sure that it only appears. So the icon only appears at certain screen sizes. So here we need to learn a little bit about the breakpoints. So in Material UI, we have breakpoints, or similar frameworks such as this tend to be breakpoints. So here we can see that each breakpoint has a abbreviation to identify the different screen resolutions or breakpoints. All of these breakpoints can be changed, of course, but these are the default. So when we use LG, we're referring to large or 1200 pixels. So the idea here is that imagine we start with 0. As the screen scales up to 600 pixels wide, then we move into small, and then we move into medium once we get to 900 pixels. And then once we get the browser to 1200, we then move into large. So we're going to utilize these values to actually show, in this case, we're going to tell Material UI to show or to remove this particular box that we're creating, this div that we're creating at certain screen sizes. So we'll add this into our styling here. So we use display, and then we can specify the different options. So SX, extra small, we want to have block, which is going to indicate the fact that this element is going to be shown. And then when it gets to the small size, then we want to make sure that it cannot be seen. So we just want to remove it. So let's just make sure we've got something going on here. SX, sorry, equals. There we go. So that's going to display the box at smaller size, the extra small. And then once the screen the screen size gets to width gets to around about the SM size, then it's going to be removed. All right, so head back into Chrome. If you haven't found this option yet, apologies, you can't see my mouse, but you can see that appear, the tooltip there appear, toggle device toolbar. So you can see blue, it looks like a mobile phone and a tablet there. So select that, that takes you to this view here. You can change the kind of default size here, just that, and you can see that we can drag across. So notice that when we move into the extra small size, it appears. And then when we go back to small, 600, I think it was, when it breaks 600 width, you can see that it is removed. Right, we want to make sure that the coloring is consistent, particularly if we are going to be implementing dark mode. So we'll set color equals inherit for now. and then area label. Give that a go. Equals open draw. We'll then go ahead and select edge equals, I don't know why I had a comma there, edge to start, and then we want to add a little bit of margin to the right to separate the icon and the logo or the name that we added earlier. So let's just add that. So while you're typing that out, let me just go through that again. So color inherit. So I don't think I've explained this before. So setting the color to the button to inherit. Remember, color is referring to the font. So in this case, it's referring to the color of the elements that we can see in the button, in the icon. So here what we're doing is we're setting the color, and it's going to be inheriting the color from parent elements. So when we start to add in different color schemes, it's potentially going to pick up the right color based upon the color scheme that we've selected. So we're going to be including, for example, black mode a bit later on in the project. So the next then, this label. So we do want to provide accessibility options. So this is an accessible name for the button that can be used by screen readers. So if we are using a screen reader, it's going to set the name to open draw. So that leaves us with edge. So here edge sets the edge of the button to start, which means that it's positioned at the left edge of the container. So left is start, right is end, and then top and bottom in this case. So and then finally we set a margin to the right. So if you remember, we have this DJ chat text here. We want to just add a little bit of margin from the button edge on the right to the text. And I've just added a margin of 2. So now when we take a look, it should look a little bit like this. You can see that we've got a margin, quite a big margin in actual fact now. Probably need to scale that down a bit, between the button and the edge of the text. Now, something we need to be a little bit careful about is, particularly at this screen resolution here, is that we need to remember this is fixed. So the app bar here that we're building is going to be fixed in this position. And thus these sections here will also be fixed. When we start to open and close, what potentially is going to happen is that it's going to open and close in front of the actual app bar. So if I just navigate down, if I open this up again, notice that this looks like it's actually sliding from the left, but it's not over top of the actual app bar. So here what we have in CSS is the ability to change something called the Z index, which essentially specifies the stack order of the elements. So if we imagine that the bottom of this page is here, and then we work from this bottom upwards, so towards you, there's different layers. So this text is on top of the background. So if you think about this text here as a different layer, it's on top of the layer that's behind it, which is just the white background. So what we can do here is we can bring things forward and backwards. So what we need to do with this app bar is we need to make sure it's always on top, so that any kind of slider like this is always going to appear back. So the top end of this, so the word explore here, if we imagine that from explore to the top, this menu still exists behind the scenes. We want to add this app bar to appear above this sliding drawer that appears. So what we can do there is we can set the Z index of the actual app bar. So we'll do that now before I forget. And we're going to bring in theme. And what we're going to do, we're going to make it dynamic almost, in that we're going to make sure that this app bar is always more than any other drawer. So the drawer element that we'll be utilizing for creating these menus that slide in. So the drawer component, so we want to make sure that our Z index is always going to be more. So Z index, so the bottom layer might have 0. We can have minus, but let's say the bottom layer is going to have 0 index. The layer above that bottom index is going to have 1, and so on. So the higher the number, the closer to you it's going to be. The lower the number, obviously that's the component that's always going to be further away, if you like. So what we need to do is we need to take the Z index of the drawer, find out what that is, and then we can just add 2 or add 1. And that means that this app bar is always going to have a higher Z index than the drawer. And thus, it's always going to be on top of any drawer that opens. So I'm going to set that to 2. Now remember that's +2. So whatever the drawer is, +2. So this app bar is always going to be on top of any drawer. Right. So now we need to build a drawer. So that is the panel, or the drawer is a Material UI component which provides a panel which slides from the edge of the screen. It doesn't necessarily matter where we put the drawer, but we're just going to add it somewhere logical in the page here. So just underneath this icon here. So let's go ahead and now build a drawer. And this will require us to define where the drawer opens from. So we can open it up from, in this case, we want to open it from the left. So we set the anchor to left. We're going to need a way of identifying whether this drawer is open or not. So we're going to specify that or set that. So let's go ahead and set side menu. So we're going to need to set up some sort of state which will then be utilized to determine whether this drawer is open or not, because we're going to need to remember whether the drawer is open or not, or have some sort of variable which we can access to determine whether this drawer should be open or not. So on close equals, so we want to maybe perform some sort of action when it closes. So this can be the toggle drawer function that we're going to need to build. So we're going to pass in false there. Right, so we're going to need some sort of text here. What we do for now, we'll add this later, the actual section that would appear in here, the category. So we'll do that a bit later. So for now, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and add, we'll build an array of numbers so we can actually just have some sort of placement holder, and we can see the behavior of the component that we're building. So we're going to create an array of 100 numbers, right? And then what we're going to do is just going to map that out. So map, so we'll go ahead and we'll just map this out. So we're going to just loop through these numbers. So we use a typography, add a key equals I. This is going to be a paragraph. And then we just then print it out. So I +1. So for now, let's go ahead and just remove the open side menu and remove that, just so that we can see what it looks like. We are eventually going to need this functionality, but I'm just going to remove this actually for now, and then just add this in shortly, step by step. Let's just make sure that we import the drawer. So update import from MUI material. So if that was a little bit confusing or if we weren't too sure, I've not used that before, it's just going to add this to the import from MUI Material UI. Right, so let's turn the server on. Now I have started the project up again, so I just need to make sure that the virtual environment is activated, and then I need to cd into DJ chat so I can then go ahead and manage.py run server, and then in a new tab just need to make sure that the React app is working. So let's cd into React chat, and then we go ahead and npm run dev. Now, in actual fact, it's a bit of a anticlimax because we cannot actually see this panel just yet. So it isn't actually visible, which does tell us in actual fact that although we have defined this drawer, it is actually, shall we say, hidden by default. So we actually have to activate it in order for it to be visible. So although it's not visible here behind the scenes, this drawer is going to be connected to some pre-created JavaScript from the Material UI library. So in actual fact, we don't need to do too much here to actually get it to be activated. And that, of course, is just by adding open, and then we just need to specify true or false. So it's going to be our role or our task to actually create a button which is going to change open to true or false, depending on whether you want the drawer open or not. So that's pretty much what we're trying to deal with within our code here. So when we go ahead and actually specify true in open, you can see that we now have the drawer open on the left-hand side. Notice a few things here though. First of all, notice the fact that it's actually floating, or it's below the app bar. If you remember, we created the app bar and set the Z index to be whatever the theme is plus 2. So the app bar is always going to be higher in the Z index, or have a higher Z index. So it's going to appear above the drawer. Now notice that we also have these numbers. That's what the loop that we created previously. So just outputting these numbers, and that just gives us a good indication in terms of the actual scroll behavior. And you can see the scroll behavior, although on the video here it looks like the scroll bar goes further than the fold. The bottom of the page is actually a little bit below on my screen, and you can see the scroll bar goes from the top to the bottom. So in order for us to actually open and close the drawer, we're going to need to keep track of the open state as well as be able to change it. So this is where we're going to utilize useState, which is a function in React that allows us to declare and manage state variables in a component. So you can think of useState as a type of variable. It's going to store a value, and that value can change. And when it does change, it will then potentially have an effect on other elements within our component that relies on that particular state. So what we're going to do here is create a new useState. We're going to set the default as false. So whenever someone views our page, the open here is going to set to false, because we're going to connect open here to our useState. So that's going to be set to default. When we press the button to open the drawer, that's going to update our state. And then by updating our state, that will then update the open value here, and therefore open or close this drawer. Right, so just before, or just after, sorry, the primary app bar, let's go ahead and create a new state. So we're going to call this sidebar. So that's how we're going to access. No, it's called side menu, sorry. So this is where we're going to be able to access true or false, the value true or false. That's going to determine the state of our drawer, where it's open or closed. And then we're going to set side menu. So this is how we're going to change the side menu value or update it utilizing this set side menu function. So that's going to equal useState. And then we're going to set the default to false. So when someone visits our page, by default, the state is set to false, i.e. the drawer is set to close. Right, so let's go ahead and just make sure we add that in. Okay, so import useState from React. There we go. So now what we can do is we can set our menu to the current state, which is obviously false by default. So if I copy this down into our drawer, so drawer open, obviously it was true, so we set that now to side menu. So if you go back now into your web page, you can see that in actual fact it's now closed. If you just want to see that working, you just need to set this to true and take a look. You can now see that the menu or side menu is open. All right, so let's turn that back to false, and then we can concentrate on building the functionality so that we can add a button to open and close the drawer. So now we need to build a function which we can fire off to actually change the state, the side menu state. So let's go ahead and just build that. So let's call this, for example, we could call this set, or sorry, toggle drawer. Let's call it toggle drawer. So const toggle drawer equals, so Let's just set this up. So first of all then, let's go ahead and assign a function to the toggle draw variable that takes a Boolean argument called open. So open, and that's going to be a Boolean. Right, so we've now defined a function, toggle draw, that takes in one argument open, which is a Boolean value that determines whether the side menu is going to be open or closed, essentially. So now what we're going to do is create another part here, which will be executed when an event is triggered, in this case, when a mouse click occurs. So we're going to define event, and then we're going to say react dot mouse event. So we're going to need to just add this on. There we go. So now we can specify the event. Let's just remove the outer curlies there. We don't need that. So here we're going to, that's going to need to be in parentheses. There we go. Apologies. So now what we need to do then, just define the event. So we're going to set the side menu to whatever's been passed in. Now remember what's happening here. We're passing in true or false, and then assuming that is a mouse event, we're going to go ahead and set, remember we set side menu function here to actually change the value of our state. So set side menu, and then we need to set it to something, whatever's specified, whatever passed in. Now remember, we could simply just call that whatever we like. Okay, so as long as it's the same, basically we're passing a value in, a Boolean in, and then we're going to use it to set the side menu state. And now we have our state and our function set up. We need to pass something into our toggle draw function, true or false, so that it can then set or change the state of our side menu. So we can use our button that we created earlier. So let's go ahead and create some sort of on click. So whenever we click our icon button, our menu icon button, we're then going to fire off toggle draw. Now remember, we need to pass in something, and that's a true or false Boolean. So let's pass in true. So that's going to change then the state to true. Thus then this open is then now going to change from false to true, and then the draw is then going to be shown. Now before we move any further, make sure this is a lowercase. I've just noticed that. You can see the color change. So open Boolean, not capital, should be a lowercase there on Boolean. Once we've done that, let's give this a go. So remember we're using Chrome here, so we can press F12 on Mac, function F12, and then we should be able to click bottom left hand corner here. There's an icon. Apologies, you can't see my mouse still, but you can see that pop up there on the bottom left. So we need to click the right there, and then we can start to scale this down. You can see the button appears. I can click on it, and there we go. So we have some functionality there. Now, at the moment, we can open it, but it doesn't look like we can close the actual draw just yet. So let's take a look at doing that. So there isn't too much we need to do here, because in actual fact, when we open a drawer like this, notice that in the middle here is grayed out. And in actual fact, anywhere we click outside of our menu here will try to initiate the closing of the drawer. So this is just a built-in function here in Material UI. So anywhere I try and click here in the gray section, that's going to try and actually close the menu. So we can actually utilize that, and that's the on closed, to then close the drawer. So go back in the code here, it's going to be as simple as just utilizing on close. So on close equals, and then we just need to utilize the toggle draw. Now remember, this time we're going to pass in the Boolean, I keep spelling it FL, false. There we go. So we're going to then run the toggle draw function and specify false, and that's obviously going to close the drawer. So we see this in action now, open, close. Simple as that. Right, so we now have our menu. Now, there is a few other things that you might want to do here, and I'm just going to leave it up to you to read through the documentation. So if you do have a look at an example on Material UI. Now, do remember here in the documentation, there's two sections ultimately for most components. You've got the API, which is going to give you some more information about the different props that are available to change the general behavior. One of them is the onClose, for example. So you've got that. That's going to be a bit further down in the component UI section. And then you've got the actual component as well. So you're going to find that in the upper section here. Select draw in navigation, and that's just going to give you and provide you some examples. Now, what you'll notice here in the examples, and you can go ahead and copy and paste some of these, is that it normally provides, let's see if I can find an example of what I'm looking for. If we look, for example, in the mini variant draw here, if you take a look at the code, you'll notice that there's some additional code here related to the actual transition, and that's related to the actual draw moving in and moving out, the actual animation of the draw. And you can see here that you can change some of the different settings in terms of the speed in which, for example, the draw enters and closes. So this helps you get started, getting a little bit deeper into the actual behavior or the animation of the draw, if that's something you want to have a look at, as well as then go ahead and have a look at the API, and that will take you a little bit further. Now, in actual fact, I was going to mention and just talk a little bit more about the different events, because in addition to, for example, a mouse event, you may also want to think about accessibility. So keyboard events. So making sure that if someone is, for example, only using a keyboard, that not only maybe they can actually open up the draw, but they can potentially also just navigate through that draw. So yeah, keyboard events. So maybe that's something else you want to take a look at maybe and include in the toggle draw. So here's just an example to help you get started thinking about that. You can see now we have created the keyboard event as well as the mouse event. And you can see here there's an if here for different types of key presses. And that's going to help support the ability or provide accessibility for those who are just utilizing a keyboard to navigate your application. Sometimes, for example, the toggle draw, for example, may open and close depending on the key that you press. Now, typically Tab and Shift is utilized to actually move through the website into different components. So for those who are using a keyboard or maybe a screen reader potentially to view your website, those are the keys that are being utilized to actually scroll through. So we don't want those keys potentially to interact with the draw and actually generate or make it perform some sort of action potentially. So what we've done here is we've created an if statement. If those keys are actually pressed, then we're just returning here. So we're not actually performing any action. So that just breaks or prevents Tab and Shift being utilized to actually initiate any action in the toggle draw. So that takes us to the last feature that we're going to include. This is it here, right? So we've opened up the menu here. So let's imagine we were now in our desktop and we scaled it down, we opened up the menu and then we scaled up. You can see here that ideally we want to make sure that if we were to scale up at this point, that the actual draw would be removed. This will also help you start to think about and show you how to actually change the behavior or trigger events based upon different screen sizes. So we need a way of actually identifying the screen size and then performing some sort of action depending on the screen size. So we can utilize the use media query here. So let's create this new constant here called is small screen. You can call it whatever you like, is small screen. So this is going to detect whether the screen is below a certain size. So we can use the use media query hook here to actually access, for example, the theme breakpoints. Inside the theme breakpoints, we can specify up or down, and then we can specify a particular breakpoint. So we're going to use small. If you've forgotten about the breakpoints in Material UI, you can just type into the search here, breakpoints. That would take you to breakpoints. You can then have a look at the breakpoint values. So small is 600 and below. So what we've just specified in our code is that if the screen is 600 or above, So this is what we're saying here, theme.breakpoints up, small. So what we're actually going to return here in is small screen size is true or false. So when the screen size is below SM, which is 600 pixels, then this is going to return false. Whenever the screen size goes above, so up over 600, then is small screen size is going to return true. So we need a way of now tracking that. So what we're going to do now is utilize use effect. So the use effect is a built-in React hook that's going to allow us to perform what is known as side effects in functional components such as this. So a side effect is typically anything that happens in your component besides rendering the actual user interface. So for example, if you want to fetch some data, or if you want to add or remove or create some sort of listener to update our component or potentially states when certain actions occur. And that's exactly what we're doing here, remember. So the screen size is moving up and down, and then we want to track whether, for example, in this case, we want to track whether this constant actually changes from true or false. Because what's happening here, our screen size is moving up and down. Okay, so we're scaling up and down. When it goes below 600, remember, this is going to change. Its small screen size is going to be set to false. When it goes above the breakpoint here, small 600, then that's going to change to true. So in actual fact, we want to track that, and we're going to track that by using use effect. So let's bring this in. So what we're going to do then, we're going to say if, we're going to create an if statement here, is small screen size and side menu. So what we're saying here is that if this side menu is open, then side menu is going to equal true. Okay. If small screen size, that means that the current screen size is going to be above 600 pixels because it's up from the SM. So if both of these are true, then we want to perform some sort of event. And that, of course, is to actually close the sidebar. So let's utilize the set sidebar menu function here in our use hook, in our use state, and let's set the actual menu to false. Okay, so we're going to need to bring in use effect. So we update React to include that in. Now what we've got here is our use effect. Now in actual fact, it's not going to be tracking anything at the moment. It's just going to happen once because we haven't specified the fact we want to track something, for example. So what we're going to need to do here at the end here, add a comma, and then here we're just going to specify what we want to essentially track, and that's the is small screen. So what we're saying here is that anytime this changes from true to false, we're going to fire off this use effect here. Right, so let's give this a go. So let's get back into our code here. We'll refresh. So remember the screen size is it's just up the top here. You can see the actual screen's resolution. So when it gets below 600, that's when the menu should appear. There we go. So at this point behind the scenes is small screen size. And we can console log that if you want to have a look at it and view it. But that's now set to false, right? So that is now set to false. So what's happened is use effect actually triggered, and this is set to false. This is set to true. So this won't happen just yet because they both need to be true in order to run this function here. So what's going to happen now, of course, I'm going to move above 600. This small screen size is going to be true. This is going to be true. This is going to be set off. Right, so let's give this a go. So watch how it gets past 600 and the menu disappears. Well, actually, let's get it open. So below, as soon as you get above 600, there we go. And there we go. That's pretty much all the functionality at this point that we're going to build. Obviously, we're going to need the dark mode feature. We'll add that separately later, but pretty much everything there, and as well as adding the actual block here, we'll do that separately as well. When we start to look at actually how to retrieve data from our API, we'll go ahead and update that as and when we look at that.